Claire's phone vibrated for the 10th time that morning. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Vanessa had a schedule: 7 in the morning, noon, 6 in the evening, like a clock programmed for destruction. He's with me now. I can feel his scent on my neck as I write this. Do you think he thinks of you when he kisses me? Claire closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and deleted the message without replying. She never replied. In the last 2 years, she had learned that silence was her only weapon, though it often felt like surrender. The house in Asheville, North Carolina, which had once been her refuge, now felt like a prison of memories. Each room echoed with memories of a marriage crumbling like wet paper between her fingers. James barely slept there anymore. There was always an excuse: late meetings, urgent projects, important clients. Claire knew the truth, but feigning ignorance had become her specialty. She walked to the kitchen window, watching the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance. The autumn landscape exploded in shades of orange and red, an almost cruel beauty in contrast to the inner devastation she felt. Her reflection in the glass showed a 32-year-old woman who seemed to carry extra decades on her shoulders. Brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes that no concealer could hide anymore, and green eyes that had lost the sparkle James used to say had captivated him. He used to say, "Past. Everything was past." The sound of the front door made her turn. James entered carrying his leather briefcase, the same one she had given him on their first wedding anniversary. 7 years ago. An eternity. "Still up?" he asked, without looking directly at her. He never looked directly at her anymore. "I couldn't sleep." "Again?" There was a hint of irritation in his voice, as if her suffering was a personal inconvenience. James was 35, with dark hair always perfectly combed, a chiseled jaw, and those blue eyes that had once made her believe in fairy tales. Now, those same eyes avoided her, as if she were a stranger. "James, we need to talk." "Not now, Claire. I have an important presentation early tomorrow." He loosened his tie, a gesture she knew well. It was his way of ending conversations before they even began. "Then when?" Her voice came out weaker than she intended. "I don't know. Soon." He went upstairs towards the guest room where he had been sleeping for months. Claire remained in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she held the cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. The liquid was cold, just like everything in her life. Another message arrived. "He just called me. He said he can't pretend anymore. Soon you'll understand that you never had a place in his heart. I was always the real choice." This time, Claire didn't delete it immediately. She read and reread the words until they lost their meaning, transforming into empty symbols on the illuminated screen. Part of her wanted to scream, throw the phone out the window, confront James, but another part, the part that had grown in those 2 years of silent torment, knew there was a better plan. Andrew Sullivan had been James's best friend since college. Tall, red-haired, with an easy smile and unwavering loyalty, he was one of the few people who still visited Claire. As James distanced himself, Andrew drew closer, not romantically, but with a genuine concern she hadn't received from her own husband in a long time. It was Andrew who appeared at the door 3 days later, when Claire finally collapsed. She had spent the morning organizing old photo albums, a form of self-flagellation that had become routine. Photos of the wedding, their honeymoon in Savannah, of moments that seemed to belong to other people. Claire. Andrew entered the room, his expression changing from casual to alarmed as he saw her on the floor, surrounded by scattered photographs. "What happened?" "I don't know who I am anymore, Andrew." The words came out broken, choked by sobs she had repressed for too long. "She sends me messages every day, every single day, and James, he knows. He always knew and never did anything." Andrew knelt beside her, carefully gathering the photos. His brown eyes reflected a mixture of anger and sadness. "How long has this been going on?" 2 years, ever since I found out about Vanessa. Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand. At first, I thought it was just an affair, that it would pass. But she wants me to know. She wants me to suffer. And James lets her. This is torture, Claire. You don't deserve this. Andrew hesitated before continuing. I need to tell you something I found out a few weeks ago. Worse than it already is? Different. He took a deep breath. I was in James's office, looking for some documents he asked me for. I found a hidden box in the bottom drawer of his desk. Andrew pulled a time-yellowed envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. There are dozens of them, Claire, all addressed to you, all unsent. Claire took the envelope with trembling hands. She immediately recognized James's handwriting, that slanted script that used to leave romantic notes around the house in the early years of their marriage. The paper was old, dated 5 years ago. My Claire, she read aloud, tears blurring her vision. Today, I saw you in the garden, planting those white roses you love so much, and my heart almost exploded with happiness. How did I get so lucky? How do I deserve someone who transforms ordinary days into poetry? I love you with an intensity that sometimes frightens me. Forever yours, James. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Claire crying. But this time, they were not just tears of pain. There was confusion, anger, and a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity. Are there more? She asked. Many more. Love letters written over the years. The last one is from 6 months ago. Andrew placed his hand on her shoulder. Claire, I don't know what's going on in James's head, but these letters, they prove he loved you. Maybe he still does. Then why Vanessa? Why let me suffer like this? I don't know, but I think it's time for you to find out. Andrew stood up, offering her his hand to help her. Your anniversary is in a week, right? Claire nodded, remembering bitterly. 8 years of marriage. James hadn't mentioned anything about the date, and she had assumed it would be ignored like everything else between them. I heard he made a reservation at Le Claire, that French restaurant downtown. Andrew had a determined expression that Claire rarely saw. I imagine it's to take Vanessa. A final declaration, perhaps. How do you know that? He asked me for recommendations for romantic places. He thought I wouldn't notice the irony. Andrew's jaw tightened. But we're going to turn that night into something neither of them expects. You deserve answers, Claire, and James needs to face what he's doing. For the first time in 2 years, Claire felt something beyond resignation. A plan was forming, an opportunity to reclaim her voice, her dignity. She looked at the envelope in her hands, then at Andrew. What do you have in mind? His smile was almost vengeful. Do you trust me? Claire thought of the cruel messages, the lonely nights, the husband who had become a ghost in her own home. She thought of the unsent letters and the mystery they represented. Finally, she nodded. Let's end this once and for all. The days that followed were spent in meticulous preparation. Andrew secured a table at Le Claire for the same night, strategically positioned so that he and Claire would have a clear view of James's reserved table. Claire spent hours rereading the letters, carefully choosing which ones to bring, which ones had the most impact, which ones would most clearly reveal the distorted truth James had constructed. For the first time in months, she looked critically at herself in the mirror. The woman who stared back still had dark circles under her eyes, still carried the weight of suffering. But there was something new there, a spark of determination that had been dormant for too long. Claire opened the closet, going through clothes she hadn't worn in months. At the back, she found the navy blue dress James had said was his favorite years ago. It highlighted her green eyes, fell perfectly on her curves. She hadn't worn it again after Vanessa's messages started, as if she no longer deserved to feel beautiful. Now, holding the dress against her body, Claire made a decision. She wasn't going to that restaurant as a betrayed and destroyed wife. She was going as a woman who demanded answers, who reclaimed her dignity, who refused to be erased from her own story. The phone vibrated. Another message from Vanessa. Tomorrow is the big day, the anniversary that should be yours with him. But it will be ours. Finally, he will publicly admit what he always knew in his heart, that he chose the wrong person 8 years ago, that he never truly loved you. Claire read the message twice, then typed her first reply in 2 years. Tomorrow night, we're going to find out the truth. All of us. She pressed send before she could reconsider. Immediately, the 3 dots appeared, indicating that Vanessa was typing a reply. But Claire turned off her phone. She had already said enough. Tomorrow, the letters would speak for her, and everyone would have to face the truth, however painful it might be. The anniversary morning arrived shrouded in a dense fog that covered Asheville like a ghostly veil. Claire woke before dawn, her body tense with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Beside her, the bed remained empty as it had been for the past few months. James hadn't slept at home again. She slowly got up, wrapping herself in the silk robe she had received in a last desperate attempt to rekindle something in her marriage. She walked to the kitchen, where the coffee maker was already programmed to turn on automatically. Some habits were hard to break, even when the person for whom the coffee was prepared was rarely there to drink it. The phone remained silent on the counter. No message from Vanessa since Claire's bold reply the night before. The silence was almost worse than the messages. It meant something was happening, that invisible gears were turning, preparing for the imminent confrontation. Claire poured coffee into her favorite mug, the one with a Virginia Woolf quote that Andrew had given her for her last birthday. Her fingers traced the engraved words as she lost herself in thought. 8 years. 8 years since she had said yes to James, under an arch of white roses in a small garden in Charleston. 8 years since she had believed she found her forever. The sound of keys in the door pulled her from her reverie. James entered, looking exhausted, his suit crumpled as if he had slept in it. His blue eyes, usually so piercing, were dull and avoided hers with customary precision. "You're up early," he commented, his voice neutral, as if speaking to a casual acquaintance and not the wife with whom he should be celebrating 8 years of marriage. "I couldn't sleep." Claire took a sip of coffee, watching him over the rim of her mug. "Do you remember what day today is?" James stopped halfway up the stairs, his back tense. For a moment, Claire thought he would finally turn, that he would finally look her in the eyes and acknowledge the date, the meaning. But he merely mumbled, "I have an important meeting," and went up to the guest room. Claire heard the shower turn on, the sound of water running like invisible tears through the house's pipes. She finished her coffee, washed the mug with mechanical movements, and went to the bedroom they once shared. The navy blue dress was already laid out, hanging on the closet door like a silent promise. Hours later, Andrew arrived as planned. He wore a dark gray suit Claire had never seen before. He was clean-shaven, his red hair neatly combed back. There was a seriousness in his face that contrasted with the reassuring smile he offered her. "Ready?" he asked, entering the room where Claire waited. She stood up, smoothing her dress nervously. She had spent the afternoon getting ready, applying makeup to hide the signs of sleepless nights, styling her brown hair in soft waves that fell over her shoulders. When she looked in the mirror one last time, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. There was strength there, a determination she had forgotten she possessed. "As ready as I'll ever be," Claire replied, picking up the bag where she had carefully stored the selected letters. LeClaire was located in Asheville's historic downtown, occupying a restored Victorian building that had once been the home of a tobacco magnate. Its tall windows gleamed with golden light as Andrew parked the car a respectable distance away. Claire could see silhouettes moving inside, elegant waiters carrying trays, couples leaning over intimate tables. "There's still time to turn back," Andrew said softly, but without real conviction in his voice. He knew as well as she did that there was no turning back. "No," Claire replied, opening the car door. "There's no turning back now." The interior of the restaurant was everything Claire had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting prisms of light onto immaculate white tablecloths. The air was fragrant with the aromas of garlic, butter, and expensive wine. A pianist played softly in a corner, French melodies floating through the air like melancholic sighs. The maître d' led them to the table Andrew had reserved, strategically positioned with a view of the entire main dining room. And there, exactly where Andrew had predicted, was James. But he was still alone, checking his phone with an expression Claire couldn't quite decipher. Anxiety, guilt, anticipation. "She hasn't arrived yet," Andrew murmured, pulling out Claire's chair. They sat down, ordering wine neither of them truly wanted, maintaining the appearance of a casual dinner between friends. Claire couldn't take her eyes off James. He was wearing the navy blue suit she had chosen for him last Christmas, the Italian silk tie that perfectly matched his eyes. He had shaved, applied that cologne that used to make Claire's heart race. He was impeccable, prepared, and it hurt in a way Claire hadn't anticipated. He never dressed up like that for her anymore. 15 minutes passed. James checked his watch constantly, his expression shifting from expectation to worry. The waiter appeared several times, offering appetizers that he politely refused, clearly waiting for someone. Then the restaurant door opened, and Vanessa Reed walked in. It was the first time Claire had seen her in person. All the images she had built in her mind over the past 2 years shattered instantly. Vanessa was not the seductive, confident siren Claire had imagined. She was small, delicate even, with short blonde hair framing a face that could be called ordinary in any other circumstance. But there was something in her brown eyes, an intensity, a hunger, that explained her power over James. She wore a red dress that contrasted dramatically with her pale skin. As she walked towards James's table, every movement was calculated, seductive. Claire watched the transformation on James's face when he saw her. His shoulders relaxed, a genuine smile appeared, and he stood up to pull out her chair. "He never smiles like that at you anymore." Andrew's voice was low, full of controlled anger. "I know." Claire forced herself to look away, focusing on the tasteless wine. "But let's see how long that smile lasts." Vanessa and James talked animatedly, their heads tilted towards each other in clear intimacy. The waiter appeared, opening a bottle of champagne James had obviously ordered in advance. They clinked glasses, and even from a distance, Claire could see the triumph in Vanessa's eyes. "She thinks she won," Claire murmured more to herself. "Let her think that," Andrew replied, his hand finding Claire's on the table in a gesture of support. For now. Dinner proceeded in 2 parallel worlds. At James's table there was laughter, casual touches, the familiar dance of a couple secure in their conquered territory. At Claire's table, there was tense silence, food neither of them truly tasted, and the growing wait for a moment that would change everything. It was when dessert was being served that Vanessa finally noticed Claire. Her eyes casually swept the restaurant, and then froze. Claire saw the exact moment recognition hit, followed by confusion, then by something that could be fear or anger, perhaps both. Vanessa quickly leaned towards James, whispering something urgent in his ear. James turned, his eyes sweeping the room until they found Claire. The color drained from his face. He stared at her as if he saw a ghost, his lips moving soundlessly, his fork frozen in midair between his plate and his mouth. Time seemed to slow. Claire firmly gripped Andrew's hand, anchoring herself to reality as her husband's eyes finally saw her for real, for the first time in months. There was shock in that gaze, yes, but also something more. Something Claire couldn't name but that made her heart ache painfully in her chest. "Now?" Andrew asked softly. "Not yet. Let them process. Let the panic grow." And it grew. She could see it in both their expressions as they talked frantically. Vanessa gestured, clearly arguing something, her eyes shooting venomous glances in Claire's direction. James was pale, his hands visibly trembling as he picked up his wine glass and emptied it in one gulp. It was Vanessa who stood up first. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her red dress, and began walking towards Claire's table with determined steps. James tried to hold her arm, but she pulled away. Her face transformed into a mask of controlled fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Vanessa hissed as she reached the table, her words low enough not to attract unwanted attention, but laced with venom. "Following us? That's pathetic, Claire, even for you." Claire slowly placed her napkin on the table, rising with a grace she didn't know she possessed. She was 5 centimeters taller than Vanessa, and she used every millimeter of that advantage, looking slightly down as she met the other woman's eyes. "Pathetic," Claire repeated calmly, "is torturing someone with cruel messages for 2 years. Pathetic is building your happiness on someone else's destruction. Pathetic is thinking you won something that was never a real competition." Vanessa recoiled slightly, clear surprise on her face. Clearly, she hadn't expected to find this Claire, this version who wouldn't bow down, who wouldn't flee. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Vanessa tried to regain control. "James chose me. He loves me. You're just the wife he was stuck with out of obligation." "Oh, really?" Claire tilted her head slightly, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt a genuine, albeit sad, smile touch her lips. "Then why did he never tell you about the letters?" Confusion replaced anger on Vanessa's face. "What letters?" Claire looked past Vanessa to where James now stood, frozen beside his table, his face a mask of absolute horror. His eyes met hers across the restaurant, and in that moment, Claire saw the naked, raw truth he had hidden for so long. Fear. Not of Vanessa, not of the consequences, but of himself, of his feelings, of the intensity of what he still felt and was so afraid to feel. Andrew stood up beside Claire, reaching inside his jacket and pulling out the envelope they had carefully prepared. "The letters your boyfriend wrote, declaring eternal love to the wife you both think he no longer loves." The piano music had stopped. The entire restaurant, which moments before had been full of lively conversation, was now silent. All eyes turned to the drama unfolding in the center of the room. James began to walk towards them, his movements robotic, like a man marching to his own execution. James's proximity transformed the air around them into something dense, almost impossible to breathe. Claire watched his every step, noticing details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way his fingers twitched nervously, the muscle in his jaw pulsing with contained tension, sweat beginning to form small droplets on his forehead despite the restaurant's efficient air conditioning. "James." Vanessa's voice came out sharp, demanding attention. "What are these letters they're talking about?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No sound emerged. Claire almost felt pity for him, for this man who had once been her entire world, and who now looked so utterly lost. Andrew stepped forward, breaking the frozen moment. "Perhaps we should have this conversation somewhere more private. The entire restaurant doesn't need to witness this." The maitre d', who had approached discreetly, nodded in silent agreement. "Gentlemen, there's a private dining room in the back, if you prefer." Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. "I'm not going anywhere. If there's something to be said, let it be said here." "Vanessa." "Please." James's voice finally worked, hoarse and low. "Not like this." "Not like this?" Vanessa spun to face him, her red dress swirling dramatically. "You brought me here to celebrate our future together, James. Our victory. And now your wife shows up with your best friend, talking about mysterious letters, and you want privacy? What the hell is going on?" Claire felt an unexpected pang of something akin to compassion. Vanessa didn't know. She truly believed in the narrative James had constructed, in the story of a dead marriage and true love found amidst the wreckage. She was a piece on the chessboard as much as Claire, manipulated by a man who was trying to run from himself. Let's go to the private room, Claire said firmly, surprising everyone, including herself. Vanessa is right about one thing. If we're going to do this, let's do it properly. The walk to the private room seemed to stretch endlessly. Claire felt the weight of other patrons' curious gazes, heard the poorly disguised whispers. Tomorrow it would be the talk of the town, she was sure. But strangely, she didn't care. There was a disturbing freedom in finally stopping the hiding, the pretending that everything was fine. The room was smaller than the main dining hall, decorated with the same discreet luxury. An oval mahogany table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs upholstered in burgundy velvet. A silver chandelier cast dancing shadows on the walls covered in Victorian wallpaper. It was both elegant and claustrophobic. Vanessa entered first, positioning herself at one end of the table with her arms still crossed, a physical barrier against whatever was to come. James followed, moving as if walking through quicksand. Andrew held the door open for Claire, his solid, comforting presence behind her. The silence stretched for long seconds before Vanessa broke it. Is someone going to explain what's happening? Or are we just going to stare at each other all night? Andrew placed the envelope on the table, the sound of paper against wood echoing like a gunshot. These are letters James wrote to Claire over the past 5 years. Love letters, confessions, all unsent, hidden in a locked drawer in his office. Vanessa looked at the letters, then at James. That doesn't make sense. You said you hadn't loved her for years, that the marriage had been dead for a long time. James ran a hand through his hair, messing up his perfect coiffure. It's complicated. Complicated? Claire's voice cut through the air, stronger than she intended. Complicated is spending 2 years receiving cruel messages from your mistress, saying I was never loved, that I never had a place in your heart. Complicated is watching my husband become a stranger without understanding why. Complicated is discovering you were writing declarations of love to me while systematically destroying me. James finally looked directly at her, and what Claire saw in his eyes made her take a step back. There was so much pain there, so deep and ancient it seemed to have roots in places she had never been allowed to explore. You don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? Claire laughed, a humorless sound. From what, James? From yourself? From the man who swore to love me until death did us part? From what I would become. The outburst surprised him as much as the others. James leaned on the table, his fingers white from the pressure. From the same monster my father was, from the man who destroys everything he touches. Vanessa looked completely lost, her eyes darting between James and Claire as if watching a play in a foreign language. James, what are you talking about? You never mentioned your father. Because he was a nightmare, I prefer to forget. James straightened up, but still avoided looking at anyone directly. Harold Sullivan was charming, successful, adored by everyone who knew him superficially. But at home, he was an emotional tyrant who betrayed my mother throughout 40 years of marriage. And the worst wasn't the betrayals. It was how he made her feel she deserved it, that it was her fault for not being enough to keep him faithful. Claire felt her heart clench. She knew about James's father, about his bitter death, but he had never shared the details, never allowed her to see that wound. My mother withered away, James continued, each word seeming to be forcibly extracted. She turned into a shadow, completely lost herself. When he died, she followed him 6 months later. The doctors said it was her heart, but I knew better. He killed her, slowly, methodically, over decades. And you thought you'd do the same to me, Claire said softly, the pieces finally clicking into place. That's why you pulled away. I started to see myself doing the same things, James admitted, finally looking at her. Little lies to spare you worry, working late to avoid confrontations, feeling this restlessness, this voice whispering that maybe the marriage wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. And I was terrified, Claire. Terrified that if I stayed, I would end up destroying you like he destroyed my mother. So you chose to destroy me first, Claire said, tears finally escaping her carefully made-up eyes. You chose to become exactly what you feared, James. Can't you see that? Vanessa had sat down, her face pale, her hands trembling. You used me, she whispered, looking at James with something close to horror. I told you about David, about the abuse, about how broken I felt, and you used me as what? A way to push her away? No, James turned to Vanessa, desperation in his voice. It wasn't like that. You were suffering, I was suffering. We made sense to each other. Sense? Vanessa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You made me believe it was real, that you chose me. God, the messages. She covered her mouth with her hand, realization hitting her in waves. You never asked me to stop sending those messages to her, did you? You never really cared that I tortured her because it fit into your sick narrative. The more she suffered, the easier it would be to justify your pulling away. The silence that followed was dense with unspoken truths. James seemed to be shrinking, all his defenses finally crumbling under the weight of the reality he had created. Andrew opened the envelope, spreading the letters across the table. Perhaps we should let your own words speak, James, since you seem incapable of being honest when you're awake. Claire picked up one of the letters, recognizing the date. 3 years ago, just before everything began to fall apart. With a trembling but determined voice, she began to read. My dearest Claire, today I woke up beside you and watched you sleep, like so many other mornings. You were smiling, probably dreaming of the garden you love so much, and I felt this absolute terror that one day I would wake up and have become my father, that I would look at you and feel resentment instead of love, that I would start looking for flaws where only perfection exists. How can I love you so much and be so afraid of that love at the same time? Vanessa was crying now, silent tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Claire continued, picking up another letter. I found Vanessa crying in the parking lot today. Her divorce was finalized, and she's shattered. We talked for hours, and for the first time in months, I felt normal. With her, I don't have to pretend to be whole. She understands the darkness because she lives in it too. But Claire, my love, my light, that doesn't mean I love you less. It means I'm too cowardly to bring my darkness close to your light. Stop, James said, his voice broken. Please stop. But Claire didn't stop. She picked up the most recent letter, the one dated just 2 months ago, and read it in a firm voice despite her tears. Claire, tomorrow is our anniversary. 7 years since I promised to love you forever. And I still do, with every fiber of my being. But I love you enough to let you go. Vanessa and I are having dinner at Leclerc, and I think it will be my way of finalizing everything. A public declaration that I've chosen another path. Perhaps then you can finally move on, find someone who doesn't carry the ghosts I carry. Someone capable of loving you without fear. You deserve so much more than I can give. The silence that followed was absolute. Claire placed the letter back on the table, her hands surprisingly steady now that everything was finally out in the open. You were wrong, she said, looking directly at James. About everything. About protecting me. About love. About becoming your father. You didn't become him because you loved too much or feared too much. You became him the moment you decided your pain was more important than my truth. The moment you chose to control the narrative instead of trusting me. James slumped into a chair, his face in his hands. His shoulders trembled with silent sobs. Vanessa looked at him with a mixture of anger, pity, and something that could be recognition of her own complicity. Andrew placed his hand on Claire's shoulder, a gesture of silent support. She covered his hand with hers, grateful not to be alone in that devastating moment. Vanessa was the first to move, breaking the suffocating silence that had settled over the room. She walked slowly to the window, her back rigid under the red dress that now seemed an accusation rather than a declaration of victory. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost inaudible. "For 2 years, I built an entire life based on a lie." She touched the cold glass, as if seeking something solid to lean on. Not James's lie, although that's monumental, but my own lie. I convinced myself it was love, that we were soulmates, united by shared pain. But the truth is, I was so lost, so broken by my marriage to David, that I latched onto the first person who offered me compassion. Claire watched Vanessa with a complex mix of emotions. She should hate her. This woman who had made the last 2 years a calculated hell. But seeing her there, vulnerable and broken, Claire recognized something familiar. Both had been victims of their own narratives, built on foundations of fear and pain. "The messages," Claire said, her voice softer than she intended. "Why so many? Why so cruel?" Vanessa turned, and her face was streaked with tears that ruined her perfect makeup. "Because if you suffered enough, if you finally gave up, it would mean I wasn't the villain, that James really chose me out of love, not emotional convenience." She let out a bitter laugh. "But every message I sent, every cruel word, was actually a cry for help, begging to be stopped. I wanted James to say no, to stop me, to prove he still cared about you. But he never did." James lifted his head from his hands, his eyes red and swollen. "Because I thought you were helping me free her. Every message from you was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. And I thought that's what she needed to move on." "You don't have the right to decide what I need," Claire said, her voice growing in volume and intensity. "You are not my savior, James. You are not a protector of anything but your own fear. You hid behind a narrative of noble sacrifice, when in reality, you were just running away." Andrew, who had remained silent observing the unfolding events, finally spoke. "James, do you remember the night before your wedding? We talked in the hotel bar until 3 in the morning." James looked at his friend, confusion mixed with apprehension on his face. "You told me," Andrew continued, "that you were afraid you wouldn't be able to love Claire the way she deserved, that you were afraid of carrying your father's marks like invisible scars that would eventually bleed over everything. And I told you that recognizing that fear was the first step to ensuring it didn't control you." "I remember," James murmured. "But you didn't really listen, did you?" Andrew crossed his arms, his expression a mixture of disappointment and contained anger. "Instead of working through that fear, of seeking help, of trusting the woman who loved you enough to endure your darkness, you decided it was nobler to destroy her preemptively. You became the self-fulfilling prophecy." Claire sat down, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained her throughout the night was beginning to dissipate, leaving behind only deep weariness and a sadness that seemed bottomless. She looked at the letters scattered on the table, all those beautiful words James wrote, but never had the courage to deliver. "Do you know what's saddest about all this?" Claire asked, looking at James. "It's not the betrayal. It's not the 2 years of suffering. It's realizing that the man I married never trusted me enough to be vulnerable. You loved me, I believe that now. But you never truly let me know you. You never gave me the chance to decide if I could handle your demons." "Because I was sure you couldn't," James replied, his voice hoarse. "My mother loved my father with every fiber of her being, and that love killed her. How could I risk doing the same to you?" "So you killed me anyway," Claire said simply. "Just more slowly, more cruelly." Vanessa returned to the table but didn't sit. She picked up one of the letters, read it quickly before throwing it back. "I need to get out of here. I need to think, to process all this." She looked at James with something akin to pity. You need professional help, James. Real therapy, not just a broken mistress to validate your self-sabotage. Vanessa, wait. James stood up, reaching out to her. No. She took a step back, avoiding his touch. We have nothing more to say to each other. I was complicit in your destruction and her torture, and I'll have to live with that. But I won't continue to be part of this sick dynamic. She looked at Claire, and there was genuine sincerity in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I know apologies don't erase 2 years of cruelty, but even so, I'm sorry. Claire nodded, unable to form words. Vanessa left quickly, the sound of her heels echoing down the hallway until they disappeared completely. The door closed behind her with a final click that seemed to mark the end of a painful chapter. James slumped back into the chair, appearing to have aged a decade in one night. What do we do now? He asked no one in particular. Now, Claire said, standing up and smoothing her navy blue dress. You go home, pack your things, and find a place to stay. I don't want you in my house tonight. Claire, can we talk about this? Please, let me try to explain better. Try to fix things. Fix things? Claire laughed humorlessly. James, you systematically destroyed our marriage based on fears you never shared with me. You allowed your mistress to psychologically torture me for 2 years. You wrote love letters that you kept like dirty secrets instead of sharing them. What exactly do you think you can fix in a conversation? I still love you. The words came out desperate, raw. The letters prove it. I never stopped loving you. Love without trust is a cage, not a marriage. Claire picked up her purse, signaling to Andrew that she was ready to go. You loved me the way your mother loved your father, with martyrdom and silent sacrifice. But I don't want to be loved like that, James. I want to be a partner. Not a fragile idol on a pedestal that you are so determined to protect you forgot to actually see me. Andrew opened the door, but before leaving, Claire turned one last time. Find a therapist, James. A good one. Work through your father's traumas, the fear of becoming him. Because until you do that, you will continue repeating the same patterns, destroying any chance of real happiness. And us? James asked, his voice breaking. Is there any chance for us? Claire remained silent for a long moment, weighing her words carefully. Honestly? I don't know. Maybe. But not now, and not the way we were. If there is a future for us, it will have to be built from scratch, with honesty and real trust. And that will take much more than pretty letters kept in a drawer. She walked out without looking back, Andrew close behind her. The hallway of LeClaire seemed to stretch endlessly, each step taking her further away from the room where she left not only her husband, but also the version of herself who had been lost in the last 2 years. The restaurant had considerably emptied. Only a few lingering couples remained, talking in hushed tones. Claire could feel the curious glances, knew she would be the subject of gossip for weeks, but strangely, she didn't care. There was a disturbing freedom in having her private life exposed, in no longer having secrets to keep. Outside, the fog had intensified, wrapping Asheville in a damp, cold embrace. Andrew offered his coat, which Claire accepted gratefully. They walked in silence to the car, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the mist. Are you okay? Andrew asked when they finally reached the vehicle. Claire considered the question, truly pondering it instead of giving an automatic answer. No, she admitted. But for the first time in 2 years, I feel like I can be okay. Eventually. Andrew smiled sadly, opening the passenger door for her. It's a start. As they drove through the foggy streets of Asheville, Claire looked out the window, watching the city lights become ghostly blurs through the mist. Her phone vibrated, and she picked it up automatically, expecting another cruel message from Vanessa. But it was from an unknown number. I hope you find the peace you deserve. And sorry again for everything. Vanessa. Claire deleted the message without replying, but this time not out of resignation. There was simply nothing left to say. That chapter was closed, for both of them. What would come next, she still didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, Claire felt she had control over her own narrative, that she could write the next chapters of her life in her own words, not in someone else's unsaid ones. The house in Asheville felt different when Claire woke up the next morning. Nothing physical had changed. The walls remained the same soft cream color, the furniture in its familiar positions, the garden visible from the window still bursting with autumnal hues. But something fundamental had shifted, as if the very air had been renewed, freed from an invisible weight that had compressed it for so long. Claire lay still for a few minutes, watching the sunlight filter through the white curtains, creating dancing patterns on the ceiling. Her body ached with a deep weariness that was not just physical, but emotional, as if she had run a marathon through her own fears and finally crossed some invisible finish line. Beside the bed, her phone remained silent. No message from Vanessa. No missed call from James. Just blessed, yet unsettling, silence. She got up slowly, wrapping herself in the bathrobe James had given her 2 Christmases ago. The soft fabric against her skin brought back memories that were no longer painful, just melancholic, like dry leaves from an autumn that would never return. In the kitchen, she made coffee with automatic movements, the familiar routine offering comfort amidst the emotional chaos. It was while she was pouring her second cup that she heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Her heart sped up momentarily, a conditioned reflex from months of tension. But when she looked out the window, she saw Andrew's familiar vehicle, not James's black sedan. Relief and gratitude mingled as she went to the door. Andrew was on the porch, holding a paper bag that exuded the unmistakable aroma of fresh croissants from the French bakery downtown. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept much either, but his smile was genuine when his eyes met hers. "I thought you might need breakfast," he said, holding up the bag. "And company, perhaps." Claire stepped aside, letting him in. "You know the way to the kitchen." They sat at the table, where so many mornings had been shared when life still made sense, when Claire believed she knew the man she had married. Andrew distributed the croissants onto plates, added strawberry jam he found in the fridge, and for a few minutes they simply ate in comfortable silence. "James called me this morning," Andrew finally said, breaking the quiet. 4 a.m. He was at a downtown hotel, apparently couldn't sleep. Claire took a sip of coffee, processing the information. Part of her wanted to know every detail, how James was, what he had said. Another, stronger part now, recognized that it was no longer her responsibility to carry his suffering. What did he want? "Answers I can't give," Andrew sighed, running a hand through his red hair. He asked how to fix everything, how to prove he's changed, that he can be different. I told him those weren't questions for me, but for a professional therapist. How did he react? He was silent for a long time. Then he said he had the number for a psychologist someone at work had recommended years ago, but he never had the courage to call. Andrew looked directly at Claire. "He's going to call today. At least, that's what he promised." Claire nodded slowly, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was hope there, small and fragile like a new sprout, but also caution. Promises were easy to make in the harsh light of the morning after a catastrophe. Keeping them was another story entirely. "And Vanessa?" Claire asked, surprising herself. "Have you heard anything about her?" "Actually, yes." Andrew took out his phone, showing a screenshot of a social media post. It was from Vanessa, a photo of her at an airport with a short caption. "Sometimes you need to get lost to find yourself. Seattle, here I come." "She's leaving town," Claire murmured, studying the photo. Vanessa looked different without heavy makeup, hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing comfortable clothes instead of the alluring outfits Claire had seen the night before. She looked young, vulnerable, human. "She has a sister in Seattle," Andrew explained. "Apparently she called her in the middle of the night, told her everything that happened. Her sister booked a ticket for her immediately. Claire returned the phone, feeling something akin to relief. With Vanessa physically absent from Asheville, perhaps the healing process could truly begin, without the constant presence of painful reminders. "How are you?" Andrew asked, his voice laden with genuine concern. "Really, Claire? No automatic or brave answers. How are you, really?" The question caught her off guard. Claire opened her mouth to give an evasive answer, but stopped, forcing herself to truly consider. How was she? Devastated, certainly. 2 years of her life had been stolen by fear and manipulation. Her marriage, something she had considered sacred and eternal, lay in pieces at her feet. The man she loved had revealed himself to be someone completely different from what she imagined, more broken and frightened than she had ever suspected. But there was also something else, something she was only beginning to recognize and name. There was strength there, a resilience she didn't know she possessed. There was clarity, an understanding of herself and her needs that had been obscured by years of trying to be what she thought James needed. And there was freedom, disturbing and exciting at the same time, the freedom to start over, to redefine who she was outside the context of her failed marriage. "I'm shattered," Claire finally replied, raw honesty in every word. "But I'm also relieved. Does that make sense? For 2 years I lived in a nightmare without understanding the rules, without knowing why I was suffering. Now I know. It's horrible and painful, but at least it's real. At least I'm no longer living in an illusion." Andrew covered her hand with his own across the table. "It makes total sense. Sometimes the truth, however painful, is less torturous than uncertainty." They finished breakfast talking about mundane things, deliberately avoiding the drama of the previous night. Andrew spoke about a new project at work. Claire shared her plans to finally expand the garden, something she had been putting off for years. It was comforting, this artificial normalcy, like a bridge over turbulent waters leading her back to solid ground. When Andrew prepared to leave, promising to return the next day to see how she was doing, Claire hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for everything. For finding the letters, for planning the confrontation, for being here now. I don't know how I would have survived this alone." "You would have survived," Andrew replied with conviction, "because you are much stronger than you think. But I'm glad you didn't have to find that out alone." After he left, Claire wandered through the house, seeing it with new eyes. Every room held memories, some good, many recent ones painfully bad. The sofa where she and James used to watch movies on Sundays before he started working weekends. The bookshelf they assembled together in their first week after moving in, laughing when they put the wrong pieces in and had to start over. The guest room where James had slept for the past few months, self-exiled from his own life. Claire paused at the door of that room, observing the rumpled bed, James's clothes still hanging in the open closet. He had left so hastily the night before that he had taken nothing but his wallet and car keys. She entered slowly, sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing in the scent that still lingered on the sheets. Her phone vibrated, making her jump. It was a message from an unknown number, but she instantly recognized James's typing pattern. "Claire, I know you probably don't want to talk to me right now, and I completely understand. I just wanted you to know I called Dr. Morrison this morning. My first session is tomorrow at 3. I also found an apartment to rent. I'm signing the lease this afternoon. I'll pick up my things when it's convenient for you. I'm sorry for everything. More than words can express." Claire read the message 3 times, analyzing each word, looking for signs of manipulation or falsehood. But there was only honest weariness and, perhaps, the first real glimpse of responsibility she had seen from him in years. She typed a short reply. "You can pick up your things tomorrow afternoon. I'll be here." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Perhaps it never would be. But it was a beginning. A willingness not to close all doors immediately, to at least allow the possibility of some form of resolution, even if that resolution was simply a civilized end. Claire spent the rest of the day in the garden, her hands in the earth offering the kind of therapy no office could provide. She pruned the white roses, removed weeds that had grown carelessly, planted tulip bulbs for the spring to come. There was something deeply satisfying in caring for living things, in seeing tangible growth result from her work. The sun was setting when she finally came inside, her hands dirty with soil, muscles pleasantly aching from the physical labor. She took a long bath, letting the warm water wash away not just the dirt, but also some of the tension she carried in her shoulders. When she emerged, she wrapped herself in her favorite bathrobe and made tea, sitting on the back porch to watch the twilight colors paint the sky. Her phone rang, and this time it was a number she recognized immediately. Her younger sister, Marina, who lived in Boston and with whom Claire hadn't spoken for weeks, keeping the collapse of her marriage a secret out of shame and misguided pride. "Hi, Marina," Claire answered, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Claire? Finally. I've been trying to reach you for days." Marina's voice was heavy with concern and a touch of irritation. "What's going on? Andrew called me this morning saying I should check on you, but he didn't give details. Are you okay?" Claire closed her eyes, considering how much to reveal. But after everything that had happened, keeping secrets felt simultaneously exhausting and pointless. So she told her everything, starting with Vanessa's first messages 2 years ago, through the slow crumbling of her marriage, the letters discovered by Andrew, and finally, the explosive confrontation at Leclerc. Marina listened in silence, interrupting only with occasional sounds of shock or indignation. When Claire finished, there was a long silence on the line before her sister finally spoke, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "Claire, why didn't you tell me? For 2 years you suffered alone when you could have called me at any time." "Shame, I guess," Claire admitted. "And stupid hope that everything would magically fix itself if I just waited long enough. You were so busy with your new job, your life in Boston. I didn't want to be a burden." "You would never be a burden," Marina said firmly. "You're my sister. Your pain is my pain, and honestly, I'm furious that James did this to you, but even more furious with you for not trusting me enough to ask for help." The words, harsh, but coming from a place of love, made something break inside Claire. Tears she'd been holding back all day finally overflowed, sobs shaking her body as 2 years of self-imposed isolation finally shattered. "I'm sorry," she managed to say between sobs. "I'm sorry for pushing you away, for trying to be strong alone." "You don't have to be strong alone," Marina replied, her own voice now thick with emotion. "You never had to be. Listen, I'm taking the first flight to Asheville tomorrow morning. I'm staying with you for as long as it takes. No arguments." Claire wanted to protest, to say it wasn't necessary, that she could handle everything on her own. But the truth was, she didn't want to be alone, not anymore. She had spent too long isolated in her pain, building walls around herself that now needed to come down. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'd love to have you here." After they hung up, Claire remained on the porch as night fully descended over Asheville. Stars began to emerge, pinpricks of light piercing the growing darkness. She thought of James, alone in a hotel room, finally confronting the demons he had fled for so long. She thought of Vanessa, flying to Seattle, perhaps also seeking some form of redemption or at least understanding. And she thought of herself, of who she had been before everything fell apart and who she could become now. The path ahead was uncertain, full of difficult choices and painful conversations. But for the first time in 2 years, Claire felt she was walking towards something, not just running from a nameless pain. Her phone vibrated once more. Another message from James. "Thank you for letting me get my things." And Claire, the letters, all of them, they were true. Every word. "I hope one day you can believe that." Claire didn't reply immediately. Instead, she brought her tea inside, locked the doors, and went up to the room that was now solely hers. She lay down. The next morning brought Marina to Claire's doorstep at precisely 9 o'clock. 2 large suitcases and a fierce determination etched on her face. She didn't wait for an invitation, simply walked in, left the bags in the hallway, and enveloped Claire in a hug that seemed to try and make up for 2 years of forced absence. "You're too thin," Marina declared, pulling back to examine her sister with critical eyes. "And those dark circles look like they have their own geographical coordinates. When was the last time you ate a decent meal?" Claire couldn't help a small smile at her sister's exaggerated concern. Marina had always been like this, turning love into practical criticism, emotion into action. It was comforting, familiar, exactly what Claire needed without knowing she needed it. Yesterday, Andrew brought croissants. "Andrew seems to be the only one with any sense in this whole mess," Marina murmured, picking up the suitcases and heading up to the guest room James had occupied. "This room is mine now, right? Because I'm not leaving you alone anytime soon." They spent the morning in a strangely normal routine. Marina insisted on making an elaborate breakfast. Scrambled eggs with herbs she grew in her small Boston apartment, avocado toast, freshly squeezed orange juice. Claire watched her sister move about the kitchen with the efficiency of someone determined to fix the world through proper nutrition. "So," Marina said as they sat down to eat, "James is coming to get his things this afternoon." Claire nodded, pushing her eggs around her plate. "At 3. I thought it would be better to set a specific time, to have some control over the situation." "Do you want me to stay, or would you prefer privacy?" The question made Claire pause. Part of her wanted the support of Marina's presence, a shield against the inevitable emotional toll of the encounter. But another part recognized that some conversations needed to happen without witnesses, however painful they might be. "Maybe you could go out for a few hours. Andrew mentioned wanting to see you, grab coffee or something." Marina smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. I'll call him now." The hours until 3 o'clock that afternoon dragged with cruel slowness. Claire tried to keep herself busy, organizing closets that didn't need organizing, wiping down already clean surfaces. Marina and Andrew left shortly after noon, leaving the house in a silence that seemed to throb with nervous anticipation. When James's black sedan finally appeared in the driveway, Claire was sitting in the living room, hands tightly clasped in her lap, trying to keep her breathing even. She watched through the window as he got out of the car, moving with the hesitation of someone approaching dangerous territory. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, so different from the impeccable suits that were his usual armor. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his own choices. Claire opened the door before he could knock, not wanting to prolong the inevitable moment. They stood for an instant on the threshold, separated by less than a meter that might as well have been an ocean. "Hi," James said, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't used it properly in days. "Your things are in the guest room," Claire replied, stepping back to let him in. "I put some boxes in there in case you need them." James nodded, moving through the house that had once been his home like an uncomfortable visitor. Claire followed him to the room, maintaining a physical distance but observing every movement. He began packing methodically, folding clothes with unnecessary care, as if the ritual could postpone the inevitable. "I had my first session with Dr. Morrison yesterday," James said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. "It was hard. Harder than I imagined." Claire leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed defensively. "What did you talk about?" "My father, mostly. Dr. Morrison thinks I developed something called intergenerational trauma-based emotional avoidance." James gave a humorless laugh, continuing to pack. "Basically, I was so terrified of repeating my father's patterns that I created the exact same patterns through different means. You could have told me," Claire said softly, "about your fears, about the scars you carried. I would have helped you work through them." James stopped packing, his hands freezing over a shirt Claire remembered choosing for him on their last birthday together. "I know. Dr. Morrison said the same thing. That my decision to protect you by ignoring you was the ultimate form of control I learned watching my father. He controlled through betrayal and cruelty. I tried to control through withdrawal and silent martyrdom. But both destroyed the women we loved. The raw honesty in his words made something shift in Claire's chest, a crack in the armor she had carefully built. What did Dr. Morrison say about Vanessa? James finally turned to look at her, and Claire saw unshed tears glistening in his blue eyes. That I used her as an emotional escape valve. Someone as broken as I felt, for whom I didn't have to pretend to be whole. He said it wasn't love, it was codependency based on shared trauma, and that by allowing her to torment you, I was subconsciously trying to push you away, validating my narrative that you would be better off without me. You're right, Claire said, her voice firmer now. About the pushing me away part, it almost worked, James. It almost completely destroyed me. I know. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if recognizing he no longer had the right to cross that space. Claire, I don't expect forgiveness. Not after everything. But I need you to know that the letters were true. Every word I wrote, but never had the courage to deliver, represented real feelings I was too scared to even admit to myself. Claire picked up one of the empty boxes, handing it to him more as a way to create a task than out of necessity. Do you know what the saddest part of all this is? It's not that you had an affair. It's not even the cruel messages you allowed. It's that you never gave me the chance to choose. You unilaterally decided that I couldn't handle your demons, that you were protecting me by pushing me away. But in doing so, you robbed me of my own agency. You turned me into a victim instead of a partner. James absorbed the words like physical blows, each one clearly landing with devastating accuracy. He resumed packing, but his movements were now careless, hurried, as if he couldn't get out of there fast enough. What happens now? He asked when the last box was full, when there was nothing left holding him there. Claire had thought about that question all morning, weighing possibilities and potential futures. The truth was, she didn't know. The love she felt for James, that intense, consuming love that had led her to the altar 8 years ago, still existed somewhere deep inside her. But it was buried under layers of betrayal, pain, and shattered trust. Rebuilding something on those cracked foundations felt simultaneously impossible and perhaps necessary. I don't know, she admitted honestly. Part of me wants to send you away and never look back. Part of me wants to believe that with therapy and real work, perhaps something can be salvaged. But James, even if there is a future for us, and that's a huge if, it wouldn't be the marriage we had. That one died 2 years ago. It would have to be something completely new, built on real honesty and trust, rebuilt brick by brick. I would do that, James said quickly, desperation coloring his words. I'd do anything. Work for as long as it takes. Maybe, Claire replied, keeping her voice carefully neutral. But first, you need to work on yourself. Not for me, not to save our marriage, but because you need to. You need to heal from the wounds your father left. Learn to trust yourself before you can ask someone else to trust you. James nodded slowly, picking up the first box. How long? How long for what? For you to know if there's a future for us or not. Claire considered the question, watching the man who had been her whole world and who now looked like a stranger wearing a familiar face. I don't know. Months, perhaps. Maybe longer. I need to rebuild myself before I can consider rebuilding us. It took 3 trips to load all the boxes and bags into James's car. Claire watched from the porch, not offering help, but serving as a silent witness to that moment of transition. When the last box was stowed, James walked back to the base of the porch steps, looking up at where she stood. Can I call you? He asked, not to pressure or ask for decisions, just to, I don't know, maintain some connection. Claire considered the request, weighing needs against boundaries, compassion against self-protection. "Once a week," she finally said. "Sunday evenings. You can call me and tell me about your therapy, your progress. But James, if I feel you're being manipulative or trying to rush me, I'll stop. I need space to figure out who I am outside of our marriage." "I understand. Thank you for at least that." He stood for another moment, clearly wanting to say something more, but finally just nodded and got back into his car. Claire watched as he drove down the driveway, the black sedan disappearing around the bend in the street. Only when he was completely out of sight did she allow the tears to come, streaming freely down her face as sobs shook her body. She didn't know how long she stood there, crying for the death of a marriage, for lost time, for the innocence she could never regain. But when the tears finally dried, leaving only a clean emptiness in their wake, Claire felt something akin to peace. Not happiness, not yet. But perhaps acceptance, the first step on a very long journey back to herself. Marina and Andrew returned shortly after sunset, finding Claire in the garden, hands in the earth, planting more tulip bulbs under the soft twilight. They said nothing, simply joined her, 3 pairs of hands working in harmonious silence as night fell over Asheville. Later, sitting on the porch with wine and the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who truly care, Claire finally spoke. "I think I'll be okay," she said, more to herself than to the others. "Eventually. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually." Marina squeezed her hand, Andrew smiled with genuine pride, and Claire knew it was true. The path ahead was uncertain, full of difficult choices and emotional labor that would make her muscles ache in ways physical exercise never could. But for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't walking alone. And perhaps that was enough for now, this fragile little beginning towards something that might one day feel like healing. Stars emerged one by one over the Asheville sky, silent witnesses to endings and beginnings, to broken hearts and spirits that refused to remain destroyed. And Claire, sitting between the 2 people who had proven that love didn't have to be destructive to be real, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best chapters of her story were still waiting to be written.